10:40 p.m. Silent hotel room. The young actress steps in for an audition, coming face to face with a 6'5" giant. He coldly pulls out a real gun hidden under the seat cushion. As the victim freezes in terror, he claims to be a healer, forcing her to undress to check her chakras, or claiming he needs to examine her body for action scene chemistry. That man holding the gun is America's greatest martial arts hero. How did he use the guise of spirituality and method acting to create a sex cult right in the middle of Hollywood? Let's explore the dark story behind it. The reality of the Hollywood casting process in the early 1990s was already a deeply flawed, manipulative system. But what was happening behind the closed doors of Steven Seagal's private meetings went far beyond the typical toxic power dynamics of the industry. This was not just about leveraging fame for favors. This was calculated, armed psychological warfare. We have to break down the concept of the casting couch during this era and look at how it was weaponized into a literal hostage situation. In the 90s, luxury hotel rooms regularly doubled as production offices. There were no cell phone cameras in your pocket. There were no security feeds in the private suites. It was an environment perfectly designed to isolate vulnerable people. Let us walk through the exact chilling timeline of what happened in 1991 to a very young Julianna Margulies. She was just 23 years old at the time. She was a working actress trying to secure a role, trying to navigate a brutal, highly competitive industry. She gets a call from a female casting director telling her to go to a hotel room for a late-night audition. The time of this meeting is deeply alarming. It is exactly 10:40 at night. Think about that for a second. Why is a professional business meeting, an audition for a major motion picture, happening near 11 o'clock at night in a private hotel suite? The casting director promises Julianna that she will be there in the room with her. That professional promise was the only reason a young girl felt safe enough to walk down that quiet, empty hotel hallway and knock on that heavy wooden door. But when that door opens, the casting director is nowhere to be found. Julianna steps inside. The heavy hotel door clicks shut behind her. The deadbolt engages. And she realizes she is entirely alone in a soundproof room with Steven Seagal. Let us paint the physical picture of this moment. Steven Seagal is not a normal-sized Hollywood actor. He stands at a towering 6 feet 5 inches tall. He is built like a heavyweight fighter, a giant occupying a confined space. He was at the peak of his fame, universally recognized by the global public as an untouchable martial arts master. He was the guy who snaps necks and takes down entire gangs of armed men on the big screen without breaking a sweat. The physical intimidation factor in that room is already off the charts. A young, relatively unknown actress is trapped in a closed room with a man who holds the keys to her entire career. But for Seagal, his imposing size and A-list industry power were apparently not enough to satisfy his need for control. He needed to push the fear to a level where the victim's brain short-circuits. As Julianna is sitting there, trying to process the highly unprofessional situation and maintain her composure, Seagal casually reaches down. He slides his hand right under the cushion of the sofa they are sitting near, and he pulls out a real heavy loaded handgun. He doesn't point it directly at her head, but he doesn't have to. He casually reveals the deadly weapon, placing it in plain sight, offering a chilling, absurd excuse. He claims he just forgot he left his gun under the couch cushion. I want you to really think about the profound psychological violence of that split second. You are 23 years old. You are alone in a locked hotel room near midnight with a towering giant, and he just pulled out a deadly weapon. At that moment, this is no longer an audition. This is a hostage situation. The presence of that gun instantly shifts the dynamic from professional pressure to literal, desperate survival. Your brain stops worrying about remembering your lines. You stop thinking about the movie role. You instantly start calculating how you are going to get out of this room alive. Then comes the ultimate twisted psychological game, with the heavy firearm sitting right there as a silent, lethal threat. He tells her that he is a healer. He drops the facade of reading a script and tells this terrified young woman that he needs to read her palm. He looks at her hand and solemnly diagnoses her with weak kidneys. For other women lured into this exact same trap, the demands escalated into pure degradation. He would use this bizarre, fake spiritual justification, or deploy the ultimate Hollywood method acting excuse, claiming he needed to check their bodies for on-screen action chemistry, to demand that they undress. He weaponized their biological fear of death to ensure unquestioning submission. If a woman speaks out, if she tries to run for the door, if she resists the demand to take off her clothes, the silent threat of that gun is sitting right there. This is not the behavior of an honorable warrior following some ancient code of martial arts. This is the act of a coward. He had to use the ultimate equalizer, a lethal firearm, to guarantee that a young woman would be too paralyzed by fear to scream or fight back. Julianna managed to escape that room with her life, but the systemic pattern of abuse continued. And you might be thinking maybe this was just a bizarre, one-time incident in the Wild West of the 90s. Maybe it was just a prop he forgot about. But it was not. This was a calculated operating procedure. This tactic of using firearms to trap and intimidate women in closed spaces was a pattern that lasted for decades. Let us fast forward all the way to the year 2010. The era has changed. The industry has evolved. Cameras are everywhere. But Steven Seagal's violent methods have not changed one bit. We have the horrifying documented account of Caden Nguyen, a young woman hired to be his executive assistant. She found herself trapped in an eerily similar, yet even more escalated nightmare. She was isolated in a sprawling, secluded home in Louisiana with him. After enduring what she described as relentless harassment, abuse, and human trafficking tactics, she reached her breaking point. She knew her life was in immediate physical danger. She realized that if she stayed in that house, she might not survive the night. In the dead of night, she makes a desperate break for it. She quietly calls a taxi, grabs whatever she can carry, and frantically runs out of the house into the pitch-black darkness of the driveway. Imagine the sheer adrenaline and raw terror of running for your life in an unfamiliar place, knowing a violent man is inside. She gets into the back of the taxi, slamming the door shut, frantically begging the driver to step on the gas and speed away. And as the car tires spin and pull out into the street, She looks back at the dark house, stepping out into the dark driveway. Emerging from the shadows of the estate is Steven Seagal. And what is he holding in his hands? He is holding a gun equipped with a bright, blinding flashlight. He is sweeping the beam of the flashlight through the darkness, gripping a firearm, actively hunting a fleeing woman like a monster in a horror movie. He is tracking the taxi with a light beam as it speeds away into the night, making sure she knows exactly how close she came to being caught. That visual image is chilling to the bone. It shatters the carefully crafted multi-million-dollar illusion of the noble, calm, enlightened martial arts hero he played on the silver screen. The movie studios spent decades and millions of dollars marketing him as a protector of the innocent. They sold movie tickets by showing him saving helpless women from dangerous armed criminals. But the unavoidable reality is that behind the closed doors of luxury hotels and private Louisiana estates, he was the dangerous criminal. He was the heavily armed monster the women needed saving from. He did not use his martial arts to protect anyone. He used his immense physical frame, a fake spiritual guru persona, and actual loaded firearms to trap, terrorize, and mentally break women who were just trying to do their jobs. The physical threat of a loaded firearm in a locked room is pure, unfiltered terror. But the most deeply disturbing aspect of this entire nightmare lies in the actual verbal excuse used to justify such horrific demands. Steven Seagal did not behave like a typical sleazy Hollywood producer offering a movie role in exchange for physical favors. Instead, the martial arts star employed a much darker, far more sophisticated method of psychological manipulation. The actor weaponized spirituality and the method acting defense. He presented himself as a spiritual authority. Claiming to be a healer, the action icon would invent pseudo-medical assessments to demand that victims undress, supposedly to check their chakras and clear their energy blockages. Or he would claim he needed to inspect their physical form to ensure they possessed the right chemistry for intense action sequences. This is not just inappropriate workplace behavior. This is a highly calculated predatory technique known as spiritual gaslighting. We really need to break down exactly how this specific type of manipulation works, because it is incredibly insidious. When a predator simply uses physical force or blackmail, the victim immediately knows they are under attack. Their survival instincts kick in. But when an abuser cloaks their demands in the language of religion, healing, and cinematic dedication, the tactic scrambles the victim's radar. The aggressor effectively disarms their psychological defense mechanisms, creating a wave of cognitive dissonance. The victim is sitting there freezing in panic, but their brain is desperately trying to process the absurd situation. They start questioning their own reality. They think, maybe this is a legitimate healing practice. Maybe this famous director really does need to test my physical boundaries for the role. By using the disguise of a spiritual healer and a demanding artist, Seagal stripped these women of their ability to immediately identify the danger. The Hollywood star framed sexual harassment as a profound medical and professional necessity. The narrative was twisted so intensely that if a young actress dared to refuse, she was not just rejecting a creepy advance from an older man. In the distorted reality built inside that room, Refusing meant she was spiritually blocked. It meant she was acting ungrateful for the privilege of working with an enlightened master. This represents the exact same psychological playbook used by dangerous cult leaders all over the world. The actor was running a miniature, highly controlled sex cult right inside the casting rooms of major Hollywood studio productions. These women were being manipulated into believing that serving the predator's physical desires was a necessary step toward their own career and spiritual liberation. But we have to ask a much larger, very uncomfortable question here. How did a violent action movie star successfully convince anyone of his status as an enlightened spiritual guru? If we truly want to decode this phenomenon, we have to look closely at the cultural landscape of Hollywood in the 1990s. Los Angeles during this era was obsessed with the New Age movement. The Hollywood elite were aggressively turning away from traditional religions and pouring millions into alternative medicine, crystal healing, aura reading, and Eastern mysticism. It was a massive, incredibly lucrative trend. Everyone wanted a personal guru to guide them to a higher plane of existence. Steven Seagal did not just stumble into this persona by accident. The man is a master manipulator who saw a cultural vulnerability and exploited it to perfection. Recognizing that wealthy executives and desperate aspiring actors were incredibly naive regarding exotic spiritual practices, the martial artists capitalized on their desperation for ancient wisdom. So, a complete reinvention took place. A strict hierarchy was established on movie sets, where Seagal was not just the lead actor or the director, but the supreme spiritual leader. The star demanded to be treated with the reverence of a god. The confusing, vague language of energy reading and chakra alignment served to build an impenetrable shield around such predatory behavior. Because in a culture that blindly worships alternative spirituality, who is going to dare to question the methods of a self-proclaimed master? The sheer audacity of this spiritual charade reached a sickening peak in the late 90s. In 1997, the illusion bypassed Hollywood and infiltrated actual religious institutions. Through a series of highly controversial and heavily scrutinized events, Steven Seagal was officially recognized by a prominent Tibetan Buddhist leader as a tulku. A tulku is a reincarnated lama, a highly revered holy figure in Tibetan Buddhism. The exact same individual notorious behind the scenes for breaking the wrists of stuntmen. The man pulling loaded guns on 23-year-old girls in hotel rooms was suddenly crowned as the reincarnation of a 17th century spiritual master. The hypocrisy of this moment is staggering. It stands as an insult to anyone with a moral compass. The media and the public watch this unfold with a mixture of confusion and deep, cynical sarcasm. People could not believe what they were seeing. How could an entertainer whose entire cinematic career and personal life were defined by extreme aggression, explosive anger, and brutal physical violence be elevated to the status of a holy peacemaker? The public quickly caught onto the dark irony of the situation. Critics started referring to the actor with a deeply mocking, perfectly accurate nickname. They called the action star the homicidal tulku. This nickname perfectly encapsulates the terrifying duality of the situation. On one hand, you have a Hollywood elite walking around in expensive silk robes, burning incense, stringing together vague philosophical quotes, and demanding that people bow to his spiritual superiority. On the other hand, the reality reveals a deeply paranoid, malignant narcissist using physical bulk and heavy weaponry to terrorize women and assault coworkers. The sacred concepts of Eastern philosophy were utilized as a cheap, dirty costume to hide moral decay. A wall of mysticism was built so thick, Fatisi, that studio executives, the media, and even the authorities were too intimidated or too confused to tear it down. When you look at the matrix constructed around this persona, you realize that the spirituality was never about finding peace. It was never about helping anyone heal their weak kidneys or unblocking their chakras. The ultimate goal was exclusively about establishing unquestionable power. A cult leader uses faith to blind followers to the abuse happening right in front of their eyes. Seagal used the language of the New Age movement to paralyze victims and silence critics. The predator knew that framing sexual demands as spiritual rights would leave victims too confused and deeply ashamed to ever go to the police. The celebrity also knew that if the media questioned this bizarre, controlling behavior, claiming religious persecution and hiding behind newly purchased religious titles would provide an easy escape. The very concept of enlightenment was weaponized and turned into an instrument of profound psychological torture. Young women were made to believe that submitting to predatory demands was a path to liberation, when in reality it was just a dark, windowless trap designed to feed an endless appetite for control. So, how does a guy pull a gun in a hotel room and just get away with it for decades? You cannot run a fake spiritual sex cult all by yourself. It would collapse in a day. You need help. You need a system. And that is exactly what Steven Seagal had. We have to look way past the guy holding the gun and the prayer beads, and we need to shine a spotlight on the people who actually handed him the keys to those hotel rooms. How does a man act like a violent warlord in the middle of Hollywood without a single police cruiser ever showing up? Well, the terrifying truth is that he didn't do this in the shadows. He did this right in the middle of a highly structured corporate machine. Let's break down this system of complicity, because they literally served him his victims on a silver platter. Let's start with the ultimate betrayal in this whole pipeline. I am talking about the decoys. When these young actresses got the call for a late-night audition, the phone call almost never came directly from Seagal himself. Obviously, that would be way too sketchy. Instead, the call usually came from a female casting director or a female production assistant. This is a highly calculated, deeply sinister psychological tactic. I mean, think about it. In an industry run mostly by powerful men, a young woman naturally drops her guard when she hears another woman's voice on the phone. The female casting director would act normal. She would give the hotel room number, set the time for late at night, and most importantly, she would make a firm promise that she would be physically right there in the room for the entire meeting. That promise of female solidarity was the bait. It was the only reason these young girls felt safe enough to walk down an empty hotel hallway at midnight. But here is where it gets really dark. The second that actress walks through that heavy hotel door, the female casting director is just gone, mysteriously vanished. They intentionally acted as professional bait, lured a vulnerable target into a cage, and then quietly stepped out of the way so the star could do whatever he wanted. Just sit with the reality of that corporate dynamic for a second. These women on the production staff weren't ignorant. They knew exactly who this guy was. They knew his violent reputation. They knew exactly what was going to happen when they locked that door from the outside. But they did it anyway. Why? Because their paychecks, their career advancement, their whole standing in the Hollywood hierarchy depended entirely on keeping the leading man happy. They traded the safety of innocent girls for their own job security. This was a perfectly functioning supply chain of abuse, and the major Hollywood studios paid for every single link in that chain. But what happens when the victims actually manage to escape the room? What happens when a woman decides she isn't going to stay quiet and she goes to the studio executives? This is where you realize that these victims were never just fighting one abusive actor. They were going to war against an entire entertainment empire, armed with bottomless bank accounts and ruthless corporate lawyers. Let's look at a highly documented incident that happened right on the set of the 1991 movie Out for Justice. During the filming of this movie, his behavior was out of control. It wasn't just a secret hidden in hotel rooms anymore. He was blatantly, grossly harassing the women working on the actual film set. The environment got so incredibly toxic, so unbearable, that 4 female employees reached their breaking point, and they did something that is almost unheard of in the ruthless, career-driven world of Hollywood. They walked off the job. They quit the massive studio movie in protest of his behavior, and they loudly threatened to sue the production company. Now, let's be real. In any normal functioning corporate office, if 4 women walk out and threaten a massive sexual harassment lawsuit, human resources steps in immediately. The offender gets suspended, an investigation starts, and the company cleans house. But 90s, Hollywood didn't operate like a normal business. It operated like a mob cartel protecting its highest earner. The studio executives didn't fire their golden boy. They didn't even reprimand him. Instead, they immediately deployed the ultimate Hollywood weapon. They used cold, hard cash to suffocate the truth before it could ever hit a courtroom or a tabloid. The studio swooped in with a massive financial settlement to make the entire problem disappear overnight. They paid out $100,000, handing $50,000 to each of the primary women leading the complaint. But let's get one thing straight. That money was not an apology. It wasn't an admission of guilt, and it definitely wasn't an act of justice. It was a vicious corporate gag order, because that check came attached to a heavily binding legal document that is honestly the dark heart of the American entertainment industry, the Non-Disclosure Agreement, the NDA. We really need to talk about how NDAs are weaponized in Hollywood to protect predators. If you don't know how an NDA works, it is essentially a legal contract that permanently buys your silence. If you sign it and take the money, you can never, ever speak about what happened to you. You can't warn other women about the actor. You can't write a book. You can't talk to a journalist. If you do, the studio's massive legal team will instantly sue you into poverty and ruin your life. For decades, the Hollywood studio system has used NDAs like a massive, impenetrable concrete vault to bury the bodies of the victims their stars leave behind. It creates this horrific cycle where the predator gets to keep working, keep finding new victims, while the survivors are legally forced to carry the secret in silence forever. Think about the impossible, cruel position these women were put in. You've got working-class production staff facing down a multi-billion-dollar movie studio. The studio lawyers basically tell them, look, you can either take 50 grand right now, pay your rent, and walk away quietly, or you can try to sue one of the most famous, wealthy action stars on the planet in a very public, humiliating trial where the media will destroy your reputation. I mean, that isn't a fair choice. That is corporate extortion. So they took the money, they signed the NDAs, and the story evaporated into thin air. The production of the movie kept going exactly as planned. And the star, he learned a very valuable lesson. He learned that his actions had zero real consequences. This is the exact financial mechanism that allowed a predator to operate for decades without facing a single criminal charge. The system didn't just turn a blind eye to his crimes, they actively financed his cover-ups. The studio executives literally budgeted for his abuse. Let that sink in. They knew he was going to terrorize women on the set, so they just kept a slush fund of hush money ready to pay off anyone who complained. Every single time the public bought a movie ticket to see him play the noble, heroic cop taking down the bad guys, a fraction of that money was going directly into a legal fund designed to silence the real-life women he was terrorizing behind the scenes. The audience was unknowingly funding the cover-up of the exact crimes the hero was fighting on screen. This is exactly why a guy can bring a loaded weapon into a casting session and never get a knock on his door from the police. Because the police are never called, the system intercepts the victim way before they can ever reach the authorities. The female casting directors act as the invisible trap, locking the door and walking away. And if that trap fails and the victim actually makes a noise, the corporate lawyers swoop right in with a briefcase full of hush money and a legally binding threat to destroy their lives if they ever speak a word of it. He might have been the monster in the room, but the studio built the room. They hired the guards and they paid for the soundproofing. They created this perfectly insulated, highly profitable bubble of immunity. They allowed him to believe that he was this untouchable God above the laws of society. Because every single time he broke the law, the studio just pulled out a checkbook and bought his innocence. They looked at the shattered lives of the women he left behind, weighed them against the box office returns of his action movies, and decided that the money was vastly more important than basic human rights. So when we talk about Steven Seagal, we can't just talk about him. We have to talk about the highly successful, chillingly efficient industry that was addicted to the money generated by a monster. We have looked at the corporate machine that enabled this behavior, but we have to look directly at the absolute devastation inflicted on the young women who were actually caught in this trap. The true horror of this story is not just the physical violence. The true horror is the profound, suffocating psychological isolation. It is the devastating realization that every single person hired to protect you has actively handed you over to a monster. Every single year, thousands of young women arrive in Los Angeles chasing the American dream. They leave their families and their hometowns to enter an industry that promises endless opportunity. They are young, they are struggling to pay rent, and they are incredibly vulnerable. In this brutal ecosystem, a talent agent and a casting director are supposed to be a lifeline. They are the professionals paid to guide careers and ensure safety. The heartbreak of realizing that these exact people are the ones locking the door from the outside is a betrayal so deep it shatters a victim's entire perception of reality. Look directly at the heartbreaking story of Regina Simons. In 1993, Regina was just a young, aspiring extra on a movie set, occupying the bottom tier of the Hollywood food chain. She received an invitation to what she was explicitly told was a wrap party at Steven Seagal's home. A wrap party is a standard industry celebration with the entire crew, producers, and caterers. It is a safe, exciting milestone. So, a young girl excitedly gets dressed up and arrives at the massive estate, only to realize with sinking terror that there is no party. There is no crew. There are no caterers. The house is empty, and she is entirely alone with a massive 6'5" action star who is over twice her age. The sudden realization of being tricked is instantly paralyzing. Facing a man 3 times your size in an isolated location triggers pure physiological shock. When the horrific ordeal happened, she didn't fight back like a choreographed movie heroine. Real trauma does not look like a Hollywood script. She froze. She went into a state of survival shock, paralyzed by fear, sobbing uncontrollably while this famous man shattered her world. And the nightmare did not end when she finally escaped that house. Regina came from a strict Mormon community. She carried the heavy, crushing weight of that assault entirely alone in the dark. She was terrified that if she spoke out, her own community would judge her and cast her out. The Hollywood machine used her youth, her faith, and her naivety as a weapon to break her. This profound sense of isolation is amplified 1,000 times over by the horrific complicity of the female executives involved. Look at what happened to Portia de Rossi. She was a working actress who found herself trapped in that exact same terrifying scenario. During an audition in a private office, Seagal lectured her about how important it was to have chemistry off-screen. And then he deliberately unzipped his leather pants right in front of her. Portia did exactly what any normal human being would do. She panicked, she ran out of the room, and she immediately called her talent agent. Your talent agent is your legal representative. Their entire job is to protect your interests. Portia is shaken, reporting a massive sexual harassment violation by a major Hollywood star. And how does her agent respond? The agent does not call the police. The agent does not call the studio head to demand accountability. The agent listens to the terrifying story of a young woman being harassed by a giant, powerful man and responds with sickening indifference. The agent simply says, "Well, I didn't know if he was your type." Let the sheer darkness of that sentence really sink in. The person paid to protect her career minimized a traumatic sexual assault by turning it into a casual joke about dating preferences. The agent didn't care about the harassment. The agent only cared that Portia had potentially ruined a lucrative working relationship with a major movie star. In that one single sentence, the entire Hollywood system is exposed. It sends a deafening message to the victim. Your body, your safety, and your trauma are worthless compared to the millions of dollars this man generates for the studio. You are entirely on your own. This exact same horrific betrayal was weaponized against Fabiola Dadis. She was an aspiring actress lured into another one of these isolated hotel room auditions. Just like the others, she was promised by a female casting director that the meeting would be safe and supervised. Fabiola trusted that female casting director. She believed the professional promise. But the second Fabiola walked into that hotel room, the casting director disappeared. She vanished into thin air, intentionally leaving a vulnerable woman entirely alone with a known predator. When Fabiola was subsequently assaulted by Seagal, she didn't just suffer the trauma of the physical attack. She suffered the agonizing, mind-bending trauma of realizing she was deliberately fed to a wolf by another woman. This is the soul-crushing reality of the Hollywood casting couch in the 1990s. It was never just a few bad men acting out of line. It was an entire ecosystem built on the systematic betrayal of vulnerable women. These girls left their homes believing in the magic of the movies, only to find themselves trapped in a terrifying nightmare where the very people supposed to guide them were actively selling them out. They were told to smile, be polite, and accept the abuse because that was the hidden price of admission to the American dream. They were stripped of their agency, their trust, and their dignity by a corporate machine that protected the monster and violently silenced the victims. The systemic betrayal by casting directors and talent agents is a horrifying reality. But we cannot fully grasp the pure darkness of this Hollywood machine until we look at the actual staggering volume of the crimes. When you pull back the curtain on this specific action star, you do not just find a few inappropriate comments or clumsy advances. You uncover the highly organized, rapidly escalating timeline of a relentless serial predator. People constantly try to defend these powerful celebrities. They try to claim it was just a different era or a misunderstanding or a bad joke gone wrong. But you cannot misunderstand a pattern of abuse this aggressive and this calculated. We have to fire through the actual timeline because the escalation of his behavior destroys any remaining excuses for his actions. Let us look at the production of the blockbuster sequel Under Siege 2 in the mid-1990s. Katherine Heigl is a globally recognized television and film star today. But back then, she was just a very young newcomer. She was brought onto this major studio movie set, simply trying to start her acting career. A normal professional leading man would treat a much younger co-star with basic respect and protective boundaries. But he looked directly at her and immediately made a deeply disturbing, highly inappropriate comment about his twisted, romantic preferences. And he did not stop at verbal intimidation. On her very last day of shooting, he used his massive physical size to corner her and forced non-consensual physical contact right in the middle of a major union-regulated Hollywood production. This shatters the desperate defense that his actions were just mutual interactions between adults. Predators do not care about professional boundaries. They only care about finding the most vulnerable target in the room. That exact same year, during the casting process for that exact same movie, we have the terrifying documented account of Jenny McCarthy. She was a famous Playboy model and someone who was very publicly comfortable with her own body. But comfort with your own body does not mean you consent to workplace assault. She walked into a standard audition room fully expecting to read lines for a role. Instead, the room was empty except for him. He told her to stand up in the middle of the room and aggressively ordered her to take off her dress. Jenny was confused and terrified. She explicitly told him that her talent agent had carefully reviewed the entire script, and there was absolutely no nudity required for this specific character. But the script did not matter to him. He looked at her and coldly stated that he just needed to see her naked body anyway. When she refused his disgusting demand and started crying, she immediately ran out of the room and rushed to her car in the parking lot. But he followed her. He chased her out into the lot and aggressively threatened her. He explicitly warned her not to tell a single soul about what had just happened in that room. He leveraged his immense industry power and his physical intimidation to enforce a strict code of silence. He was literally using the legitimate, regulated Hollywood audition process as his own personal hunting ground. We see this same brazen arrogance repeated with Portia de Rossi. She was sitting in a private office for a final casting call, attending what was supposed to be a professional meeting to discuss on-screen chemistry. He walked in, sat down directly in front of her, looked her dead in the eye, and slowly unzipped his leather pants. He did not care who was standing outside the office door. He did not care about the studio executives or the human resources department. He operated with the terrifying certainty that he was an untouchable god, and the women sitting in his presence were simply his personal property to be used and discarded. But if you think the casting couch horror stories of the 1990s were the peak of his depravity, you are wrong. A serial predator never de-escalates their behavior. They never simply stop. If they are never caught and never punished, they only get worse. They push the boundaries of their power until they completely cross the line from Hollywood workplace harassment into literal international human trafficking. To see the final horrific evolution of this monster, we have to fast forward all the way to the year 2010 and look at the absolute nightmare experienced by Caden Nguyen. Caden was a young, aspiring model who responded to what looked like a completely legitimate corporate job listing. The advertisement was looking for an executive assistant to a major Hollywood star. This is a very common, sought-after stepping stone in the Los Angeles entertainment industry. Young people constantly take these grueling, low-paying assistant jobs, hoping to make industry connections, learn the business, and build their resumes. It is the classic American dream hustle. But this specific job listing was a terrifying lie. It was a fake front designed to trap a victim. This is exactly where the glittering, glamorous illusion of the entertainment industry perfectly overlaps with the dark, horrific underground reality of sex trafficking. Caden accepts the job and flies out to his heavily guarded, secluded estate in Louisiana. She genuinely thinks she is going to be sitting at a desk, answering professional emails, organizing shooting schedules, and booking flights for a movie star. But the second she steps onto that isolated compound, the trap violently snaps shut. She quickly realizes there is no office. There is no schedule. She has not been hired as an executive assistant. She has been lured into a highly controlled, deeply terrifying private prison. She discovers the horrifying reality that she is not alone on the property. There are 2 young Russian women already living inside the compound, and these women are not staff members. They are not assistants or housekeepers. They are kept on the property, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, explicitly and exclusively to serve his sexual demands. Caden realizes with freezing terror that she was not hired to work. She was trafficked across state lines to be a replacement for one of his sex slaves who had recently escaped or been discarded. The massive lawsuit she eventually filed against him is a $1 million roadmap directly into hell. She detailed how she was systematically held against her will. She described the horrific environment where he used illegal prescription pills to keep the women compliant, confused, and physically unable to fight back or escape. She was groped, assaulted, and held hostage on a private, isolated compound by a man who had lost touch with any sense of reality or human empathy. He was no longer just a spoiled movie star abusing his power on a soundstage in California. He was a wealthy, heavily armed warlord running a private illegal trafficking ring right in the middle of the American South. This horrifying escalation proves exactly why we can never, ever dismiss inappropriate workplace behavior as just Hollywood being Hollywood. When a major entertainment studio gives a malignant narcissist hundreds of millions of dollars, physical power, and decades of legal immunity, he does not just stop at asking women to take off their clothes in hotel rooms. The sickness grows. He builds a heavily guarded compound. He uses illegal drugs to control his victims. He turns living, breathing human beings into imported, disposable property. The endless chain of victims, from a young newcomer on a movie set to a trafficked woman held captive in Louisiana, is the direct, undeniable result of an industry that chose to protect its profits instead of protecting human lives. The sheer volume of abuse and corporate cover-ups in this industry can feel incredibly suffocating. It is very easy to look at the massive studio settlements, the terrifying power dynamics, and the heavy firearms, and conclude that these young actresses were powerless victims trapped in an unbeatable system. But that is not the truth. The brightest, most powerful part of this entire dark saga is not the eventual downfall of the actor. The true light comes directly from the fierce, unapologetic resistance of the women who stood in that room with a monster and flat out refused to be broken. They did not surrender to the Hollywood casting couch. They fought back. They used their profound intelligence, and they made daring escapes that shattered his illusion of control. Let us look at exactly how these women dismantled his power in real time. Look back at the chaotic set of the movie Out for Justice. 4 female crew members looked at a highly lucrative career-making studio job, looked at the toxic behavior of the lead actor, and rejected the entire premise. You have to understand the immense professional risk they took. In a deeply cutthroat industry where thousands of people are waiting in line to take your job, walking away from a major production is professional suicide. You risk being blacklisted. You risk never working in the entertainment industry again. But they did not stay and suffer in silence just to get a credit on their resume. They banded together, stood their ground, and walked right off the set in protest. They drew a hard, undeniable line in the sand. They proved to the entire studio system that no paycheck, no matter how large, is worth sacrificing basic human dignity. Then you have the brilliant, quick-thinking survival instincts of Julianna Margulies. Think about the sheer psychological terror of her specific situation. She is 23 years old. There is a towering giant blocking her only exit. There is a real loaded handgun sitting right in the open. He is using his fake spiritual guru routine, demanding she undress because he claims her kidneys are weak. The level of panic in that locked hotel room would paralyze almost anyone. It is designed to make you freeze. But Julianna did not let the panic take over her brain. She found a tiny sliver of opportunity, and she took it with absolute precision. She looked this armed, massive Hollywood star right in the face, ignored his twisted demands, and delivered a legendary response. She looked at him and simply said, "Thanks for the medical information about my kidneys. I have to go now." She grabbed her bag, turned her back on an armed predator, and walked straight out of that heavy hotel door. She used sharp wit and pure confidence to shatter his bizarre spiritual matrix. She refused to play his twisted game, Shetiun, and her sheer audacity got her out of that room alive. This exact same fierce, uncompromising rejection was mirrored by Jenny McCarthy and Portia de Rossi. When McCarthy was aggressively ordered to take off her clothes for a role that did not require any nudity, she did not hesitate. She did not try to politely negotiate with the madman. She instantly recognized the extreme danger of the situation, burst into tears of pure frustration, and ran straight out of the audition room into the parking lot. When Portia de Rossi was trapped in that office and he unzipped his leather pants, she did not excuse herself or try to smooth over the awkwardness. She bolted. These women rejected the unspoken, toxic rule of Los Angeles that dictates you must compromise your physical safety to make it in the movie business. They looked at the so-called American dream of Hollywood stardom, saw that it was permanently attached to a violent predator, and sprinted in the exact opposite direction. They chose their own safety over his movie roles. But the most intense cinematic story of pure survival belongs to Caden Nguyen. We really need to dive into the raw terror of her escape from that isolated Louisiana compound. She was trapped in a highly secured location, essentially held captive alongside two other women, constantly monitored by a paranoid, heavily armed man. She realized very quickly that if she confronted him directly, she might literally lose her life. She was entirely cut off from the outside world. So she used tactical brilliance. She knew she had to create a distraction to buy herself a few precious minutes. She fabricated a believable story, telling his staff a lie about needing to leave temporarily to visit a family member. She manipulated the master manipulator. And when she finally got the chance to call a taxi in the dead of night, she had to make a brutal, split-second decision. She realized she could not pack her bags. If she was seen carrying luggage down the hallway, she would be stopped immediately. The illusion would break. She had to leave everything she owned inside that house. She walked out into the dark driveway, leaving behind her expensive laptop, all her personal makeup, her clothes, and even the keys to her own car. She traded every single piece of her material property for her physical freedom. When that taxi finally pulled up, she jumped into the back seat and sped away into the night. She looked out the back window to see him hunting her in the driveway with a flashlight attached to a gun. She escaped that nightmare with nothing but the clothes on her back and her life. These stories of escape are not just footnotes in a Hollywood scandal. They are the ultimate proof that the abuser was never actually a powerful, enlightened warrior. He was a coward. He was a deeply insecure man who relied entirely on hidden weapons, locked doors, fake spirituality, and corporate hush money to intimidate people who were physically smaller than him. The second he faced a woman with the courage to say no, the courage to mock his fake spiritual diagnosis, or the courage to literally run out the door, his entire illusion of supreme power evaporated into thin. We spend so much time analyzing the psychology of the predator, but we need to honor the incredible strength of the survivors. These women are the true action heroes of this story. They did not need stunt doubles or martial arts training to defeat him. They faced down a heavily armed, multi-million-dollar Hollywood machine using nothing but their own sharp instincts and their unbreakable self-respect. They proved that no matter how much power, money, or industry influence a predator holds, they can never extinguish the human will to survive. Let us go back to that dead, silent hotel room at 10:40 at night. Think about the towering giant reaching under a sofa cushion to pull out a real loaded gun just to terrorize a young actress. The sickening irony of his entire existence is that the entertainment industry paid him hundreds of millions of dollars to play the ultimate savior. They sold him to the global public as the noble, untouchable warrior who kicks down doors and risks his own life to rescue helpless women from dangerous armed criminals. The movie posters portrayed him as a shield for the innocent, but the terrifying reality hidden behind the cameras and the stunt doubles was that he was the exact monster those women desperately needed saving from. He was the one locking the heavy hotel doors from the inside. He was the one taking hostages. He was the villain in his own movie. But you cannot hide behind a fake spiritual matrix and a martial arts costume forever. When the cultural tide finally turned, the era of blindly protecting toxic masculinity collapsed as brave women refused to stay silent and the movement to protect victims swept through the industry. His untouchable Hollywood empire crumbled into dust. The major studios could no longer afford the legal liability of his dark presence. Stripped of his corporate protection, his hush money slush funds, and his fake spiritual aura, he did exactly what every unmasked bully does. He ran away. He fled the American entertainment industry. He had to run across the globe desperately seeking refuge in foreign countries and authoritarian regimes like Russia and Serbia. He packed his bags and sought out the darkest corners of the world, begging for citizenship in places that still worship brute, unchecked force and toxic power, simply to find anyone still willing to stroke his shattered ego. The pathetic collapse of his career is the definitive end of an era. It proves that a Hollywood hero costume can no longer be used as a permanent shield for a predator. Steven Seagal stands as the ultimate horrifying proof that absolute power, mixed with unchecked fanaticism and corporate greed, can turn a glamorous movie set into a living, breathing hell. His legacy is not martial arts. His legacy is fear. And it forces us to ask one final, deeply uncomfortable question. How long did the Hollywood elite actually tolerate and enable his twisted spiritual matrix, turning a blind eye to his crimes, just to keep the dirty money flowing into their bank accounts? When the director yells, "Cut," the cameras stop rolling, but the trauma for these actresses does not. What we have just seen is proof of a toxic power dynamic where art becomes a shield for abuse and silence is bought with fame. It is time for the truth to be heard. What are your thoughts on this dark reality? Leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe to Actor Secrets as we continue to expose the dark side of Hollywood. Thanks for watching.